Hi, this is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, joined by Sheldon Richmond, the vice president of the foundation, coming back to y'all with this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle. Sheldon, I thought we'd talk about the Amazon controversy that's going on with Amazon and some of the ebook publishers. I think it provides a nice opportunity to explain to people the difference between how libertarians see economic activity and how statists view economic activity. Here Amazon is in this battle with certain publishers that are upset with Amazon because Amazon set certain types of conditions, pricing and so forth on ebooks, and they're playing hardball with some of these publishers. And so you've got the statists all up in arms and claiming that Amazon's a big business, a monopolist and has predominant share of the market, and that the government should step in and do something. And of course, we libertarians say, well, this is what the free market's all about. That the bigness in and of itself is not bad. We don't support things like, antitrust laws and government intervention. Let the market ferret things out. Let there be negotiations. If things work out, fine. If they don't work out, fine. Isn't that what free enterprise is all about? Enterprise that's free of government control and regulation?
Well, it certainly is. Of course, we need to broaden the picture here. I mean, we're often pointing out that we don't have a free market, so we have to be careful and note that these guys are not operating in a purely free market. I mean, this immediately brings up the issue of intellectual property and copyright, which of course is right at the heart of all this. And so this is a big question that libertarians even themselves are not entirely agreed on.
Yeah, but I'm talking about in the larger scheme of things. And yeah, we agree that we're living in a very controlled environment with respect to economics. The government does intervene. We have a giant welfare state, giant tax system. But just in terms of how a libertarian society would operate, you'd have Amazon that has gotten big. How? By providing goods and services that people are satisfied with. I mean, let's face it, Amazon does a good job at satisfying consumers. This is why it has this predominant share of this market. And notice when I say predominant, say on the ebook, we know that Amazon does a lot of things. They sell just about everything, I think. But this controversy happens to be over ebooks. They're trying to get a certain price. The publishers are not satisfied, so Amazon's not putting them in a predominant location or delaying the shipment of their books or whatever. These are standard negotiations. But what I'm suggesting is that simply because a company is big doesn't mean that it's bad. In fact, it's the exact opposite. A company that gets big by satisfying consumers, by providing what consumers want, is something that's good. I mean, this reflects success in the marketplace. Setting aside the point you're making that, yeah, there's a lot of government intervention. We don't really have a free enterprise system. But in a purely libertarian sense, bigness is not bad at all. Assuming that the company is getting its revenues in its large size by satisfying consumers.
No, in a truly free market, the size, of course, would end up being regulated by free competition, and so I take your point. Look, Amazon is negotiating with publishers, and it has been slowing down the release of or making available titles, or maybe not even making them available at all if they don't get the kind of deal they want out of the publishers. And they have to weigh certain things, because if they're not making every book available to its customers are going to start looking somewhere else. So they have that on the other side. I mean, there's no disagreement here. The government should stay out of it. One thing I was trying to draw attention to was that there's an intellectual property background to all of this. And I know many libertarians, myself included, who would say that in a truly free market, nobody could claim to own a pattern of words, and nobody could be prohibited from putting a pattern of words on a piece of paper or arranging them in the form of electrons or whatever digital books are made out of, and then conveying those things to other people. So I think the libertarian world in this respect would look very different, and these kinds of issues wouldn't even arise.
Yeah. Certainly there is a debate within the libertarian movement on intellectual property rights, but given the system we have today, it just seems to me that this is a matter that the government should stay out of. Let Amazon negotiate with these publishers. If they're able to strike a deal, great. If they're not, then that's just the way things go sometimes. And your point's very well taken, that if Amazon plays hardball to such an extent that it's not selling the books of these particular publishers, very likely other companies will start getting a larger share of market share. If people get dissatisfied with Amazon, they tend to move elsewhere. And as long as there is freedom of entry into an enterprise where other people can come into the marketplace, and from what I understand, Amazon's got 65%. Well, that's not even close to 100%. So you've got other companies that are obviously satisfying consumers. They have 30%, 35% of the market. And to me, that's what the free market's all about, is this competitive process. And Amazon, there's always this assumption that because a company's big, that it has this monopolistic control. It's going to stay like that forever. It can dictate terms to consumers and customers and publishers and so forth. This is nonsense. That if you look at the Fortune 500 list of the top 50 companies of 30 years ago, I'm willing to bet that very few of any of those top 30 are still in the top 30. And this is what the market dynamic does. If you don't satisfy consumers, you lose market share. You may even go out of business. And this is what I think statists don't recognize, is the power of the consumers. The consumers ultimately are the sovereign. The power of consumers to decide which businesses are going to stay in business and which aren't. If Amazon doesn't satisfy consumers, they can't maintain this predominant share. So there's this constant burden on them to come up with a better product and better satisfaction of consumers. That's the virtue of the competitive free market process.
Right. And it does happen to a large extent. So you're right. Companies shrink and disappear, and others grow and become large. And bigness per se is not the issue. One thing I'd like to see, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw this, would be the publishing company, which is currently having problems with Amazon. I forget the name of it. And if this is essentially a Kindle issue, the company could make its ebook available and then have it converted into Kindle format, which would enable Kindle users to obtain that book and bypass Amazon altogether. That would be one way to respond to Amazon. Now, the question is, what would Amazon do? If Amazon then claimed intellectual property rights and went after the publishing company, that'd become a very interesting battle. But that's one way to fight this, is to go outside of the framework. I mean, it's possible to get other kinds of documents not through Amazon for your Kindle. I do it all the time. I'm not talking about, and this isn't even a violation of IP law. There's software to let you take an article you're reading on the New York Times or any website and have it converted to Kindle format and sent right to your Kindle. I mean, I do that all the time. So this may be one way that publishers attempt to break this power, I use that in quotation marks, power that Amazon has to try to hammer them into giving them an especially low price. That'd be interesting. That'd be an interesting fight.
Yeah, and the point being that you really don't have any need for antitrust laws. I mean, that's one of the things that we libertarians would just ditch antitrust laws. That I mean, the real monopoly that we really have to be concerned with is the legal monopoly, where the government gives the privilege to somebody to operate a business or an enterprise and prohibits by law any competition. That's the only real monopoly that's destructive of liberty and prosperity and consumer satisfaction. The best example is the Postal Service. That's your classic monopoly. It's huge. It's big. For some odd reason, the state has never complained about the postal monopoly. If anybody tries to compete in the delivery of first-class mail, they immediately go to federal court and get an injunction to shut him down. That's your classic monopoly case where the government is there with its laws protecting somebody from competition. But in the marketplace, when you get big by satisfying consumers, that is a totally different deal. And it also raises this notion of equalization. You know, we hear this so much, Sheldon, from the statists of, there's not enough equality of wealth. There's tremendous disparities of wealth. Now, as you pointed out initially, much of this is due to this distorted, warped economic system that we have that goes under the name of free enterprise that libertarians know is about as far from free enterprise as possible. But the point is that in a libertarian society, you don't need to worry about disparities of wealth. That the people that are becoming wealthy are the ones that are satisfying consumers. What's wrong with that? They're providing goods and services that consumers want. And if they fail to do that, they lose market share. They start to go out of business. So why do you need this coercive apparatus to equalize wealth when the market does a very good job of taking wealth away from, say, heirs to a family fortune because they're not satisfying consumers anymore? There's that old saying of from short sleeves to short sleeves in 3 generations, where one generation, builds the business and makes millions, but by the time the wealth gets down to the 3rd generation, it's dissipated because they don't have that business acumen that the original founder had.
I agree. In a truly free market, I agree with you about what you were saying about the legal monopoly. I certainly agree with that. And in a truly free market, wealth, couldn't be frozen in place, and so you wouldn't have particular families or groups, being able to achieve some top spot and then never having to relinquish it because competition would be the rule, and it would make and unmake people, fairly frequently. So people would have to strive to satisfy consumers in order to maintain their wealth and have that grow. So even if someone who, this is, I think, a powerful argument we can make with people who are not libertarians, even if you don't like this extreme inequality of wealth, which, and I agree with what you said earlier, much of that can be attributed to widespread government intervention. But even if you don't like that, there'd be no reason to trust the government to undo that or make things right as those people might see it. Because, the government, people in the government have their own incentives, they have their own political rationales and agendas, and to think they're going to, quote, use it to equalize wealth is ridiculous. It just flies in the face of everything we know about how politicians operate. They're not looking for ways to empower people. Notice how they never speak about any of the things that could be undone that actually empower people. And that means occupational licensing and zoning, all the things we've talked about, all kinds of permitting, which keep people out of lines of work or make it much more costly to get into it. If they really cared about people and wanted to see people at the bottom be able to work their way into wealth, they'd be talking about that. Instead, they always talk about ways that empower politicians, never ways that empower just regular individuals.
Yeah, your point about licensure is a great example. I would say look at the regulations that they're supposedly designed to protect the consumers and so forth. Really, these regulations serve as benefits to the well-established businesses. And many times the well-established businesses, the big corporations and stuff, they love these regulations. Why? Because they know that it prevents young upstart firms from popping up in competition against them. Minimum wage laws are a classic example where a business can't start up by hiring just a bunch of people that are willing to work at $2 an hour. And so they're not even able to start up because they lack the capital to pay the enormous minimum wage law that's set. Or you've got these regulations that require, handicap access and so forth. A lot of businesses can't get started in that way. Well, if you're a big established business and you've got high revenues, you look at those burdens and you say, okay, it's a cost of doing business, but I can afford it. And look at the money that I'm making by having this privileged position in society where I don't need to worry as much about other firms coming in and competing against me, satisfying consumers better. So the regulated society, or the permitted society, is the society that oftentimes protects the market share of these big established companies by keeping out the competitor who would be taking market share away from them.
Right, and if you have, a government with this kind of power, we shouldn't be surprised that then people buy access to it and get a hold of the power. It's what people are going to do if that's available. That's what the progressives never seem to get it through their heads, that if they want to, they always complain about money and wealth and influence on the political system, but they never seem to make the connection that if the political system has those kinds of powers, they're always going to be accessed by people with money. There's no way to do that. They want to treat a symptom, but they don't want to ever go against the cause. I mean, because they like a government that has this sort of power, but they, just complain when somebody they don't like gets a hold of it. And so they want it both ways. They want the power there sitting there and somehow block the people they don't like from ever getting their hands on it. That's a losing proposition. They're never going to win that. They're never going to make sure only the people they like use it in the way that they approve of. But they're so enamored of the state and state power that they won't even, they won't even take a moment to listen to the kind of pitch we're making.
That's a great point. I mean, they often say that the reason that there's so much money going into political campaigns is because of the government's power to do good things for you and bad things against you. Good things in terms of tax benefits, tax deductions, tax credits, any kind of privileged position with respect to taxes. I mean, there's a reason why the Internal Revenue Code is like 6 inches thick, because every one of those things, or at least many of them, was designed as a benefit for somebody. And so there's this incentive. But if you look at the religious sphere in America, the ministers and churches, you don't see them pouring, thousands of or millions of dollars of church monies into the government, because the government doesn't have the authority to give them grants and welfare and subsidies into the churches or regulate the churches. So that there's no incentive to fund those types of things. And I say that if we achieved the Libertarian Society and separated economy in the state the way we separated church and state, and separated charity in the state, separated education in the state, and so forth, there would be virtually no incentive to be funding all these political candidates. You really wouldn't care who was in office if they couldn't do all these good things for you and all these bad things to you. Let me shift gears a little bit here in the few minutes we got left. Notice that some of these on the NSA, the surveillance schemes. I noticed that that some of the firms are fighting back here now. The American tech firms, Google and so forth, the ones that are doing the routers and so forth, that they're now fighting back and saying that they're doing their best to protect their products from government intrusion. This is after some of them participated with the government, worked with the government. All of a sudden they're getting a sense that people don't like this. And that here's a classic example of where some of them are losing market share to foreign companies because foreigners are saying, we know what you're doing. You're working with the NSA. You're interfering with these products. You're putting back doors in here. You're going to monitor what we're doing. We don't want anything to do with you. So out of self-interest, it looks like some of these companies are fighting back. They're doing their best to keep the government from getting in there secretly and surreptitiously into their products. It's kind of an interesting sign. What do you think?
A very promising sign. Wish it happened sooner, but I guess they're realizing that people are not happy about the idea that their email could be read. I saw that Google last week announced that they're working on an encryption scheme for Gmail users. Encryption programs have been available for people who don't use web-based email, but who use an email client like Outlook or one of those, Thunderbird, where they maintain the email on their own drive. But more and more people are using web-based mail like Gmail or Yahoo or Hotmail, and you haven't been able to encrypt, or it was very difficult. So Google announced that it was going to use an open source known as PGP, pretty good privacy, something related to that, to make that available, which means then when your email gets sent, before it goes on to the recipient, it's encrypted, and that would make it very difficult for the NSA to get a hold of it. Of course, they're working on a supercomputer that they claim will be able to break any encryption. We'll see about that, but I'm glad to see these companies finally waking up and realizing that they've been too cooperative and too passive as far as this government surveillance goes.
Yeah, it's a classic deference to authority mindset. And we saw this immediately after 9/11, where the government was bludgeoning these companies into cooperating with massive violations. You had the telecom scandal where they were clearly committing illegal acts, with Joe Nocchio from Quest being the notable exception to that. And but the government bringing it all up in terms of cooperation under patriotism and working with the government to protect us from the terrorists and all this other nonsense. Finally, you see a little bit of pushback here. And I'd like to think that some of it's principle of people valuing privacy and the importance privacy plays in it. But clearly some of it's economic. They realize that if they're working with the government, that's not what people want. They want their privacy. And maybe, this to me is one of the great benefits of all the Snowden revelations and all the controversy that's developed, is that people are figuring out, hey, I'm entitled to my privacy. It's my right as an American. It's not a question of whether I'm doing anything illegal or not. And the companies are picking up on this. And it would be nice for them to be taking the role of really what the press should be doing, the role of the private sector. That we do not want government infringing on fundamental rights, and certainly privacy is one of those rights. It would be great if this transcends into CEOs taking a public stand against the government on foreign policy, these invasions and occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan and Vietnam and so forth. That it'd be nice to see some CEOs taking public stands and joining up with us libertarians to get this country back on the right road, Sheldon.
Right, but the government has so many devices, methods for making it difficult for companies. For example, you have Sprint now wants to merge with T-Mobile, but that has to go through the FCC for approval. If Sprint or T-Mobile had resisted the NSA efforts, we don't know exactly whether that would then come into consideration when these two companies propose to merge, but it's not unreasonable to think that the notice is taken and difficulty can be made for companies that need some kind of permission from the government just to do something seems like they ought to be able to do anyway. And so there's 100 ways or more to pressure a company into not rocking the boat, especially when it comes to something as big as the NSA and as powerful as the NSA.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point as to whether we can really reach a point where we can trust these American companies, where they found religion and they say, oh no, we're not going to cooperate with the government anymore. Can we trust them? And because, as you point out, the government has so many means by which it can blackmail people, where a company can say, oh well, we're opposing this and we're protecting you, but under the table, they're still secretly working with the government. All this is to say that, I think that the libertarian solution is the only solution there is, and that's to dismantle this whole national security state apparatus that we've lived with, since the Cold War era, that we really don't need. And I think that's what people need to finally figure out, that a free society does not involve this apparatus, the NSA, the big standing military, the empire, the CIA, that these are antithetical to a free society. And, even Eisenhower, when he gave his farewell address, he says, well, these things are necessary, but they're like a necessary evil. But he says, keep in mind that they're a grave threat to a democratic society. Well, I would argue that they're not even necessary. And that they are indeed a threat to a free society. They're antithetical to a free society. And so if you have a society in which people are not having to worry about this anymore. That, to me, is where you have a genuinely free society. But as long as you have an NSA in existence, it's always going to be lurking the possibility that the government is there recording your phone calls, recording your emails. And so it seems to me that only the libertarians have it right. I mean, I'm even surprised that Snowden himself says that he doesn't want to dismantle the NSA. I mean, he's clearly one of them. He wants to make it more efficient. He wants to make it more accountable. But he hasn't yet broken through to the libertarian idea of you don't need this apparatus at all.
No, that's true. It's amazing how conventional he is. I mean, he just thinks the people were not let in on this, and he wanted them to have more of a say. And you know, as a matter of fact, you know, he just dumped the material in the hands of Greenwald and Gelman at the Washington Post and said, "You decide what should be released." So, and he thought that so it's either we have a choice between either the government deciding what gets released or a couple of journalists deciding what gets released. This is how Snowden saw it. So this is hardly a radical stand to take, even though that may surprise some people who think it's the height of radicalness to disclose classified documents to journalists. But he really does see things in fairly conventional terms.
Yeah, in the libertarian world, you wouldn't even have an NSA, and so you wouldn't have any documents, records on people, whether to disclose them or not, because they simply wouldn't exist. Well, we got a few minutes left. I know we've talked about Bergdahl, but it is a continuing controversy. I thought we'd just touch on it a little bit. From what I can sense, the mainstream press is coming out saying that, look, President Obama did the right thing, that whether the guy deserted or not is a separate issue. But when you got a soldier, an American soldier, is being held by enemy forces, the best thing to do is to make whatever efforts are possible to get him back. And other commentators are making the point that the people they traded him for are not terrorists. They were members of the Afghan government, the Taliban government. And so you've got two separate tracks working in Afghanistan. You've got the American military that's going after accused terrorists operating in a police function. But then you've got a war against the Afghan government because they refuse to extradite this guy. Well, that war is essentially over. I mean, there may still be a civil war going on inside the country over control of the government. But, you know, what role does the U.S. government have in that? And so at the end of a war, you release prisoners. And we did that with Nazi prisoners, Japanese prisoners. So I think they're on the right track here, but again, they're not facing the fundamental issue. And that is that when a soldier signs this contract, he abandons his conscience. That's what's expected of him. That he's not to question the people that he's ordered to kill. He's not supposed to question that, the mission. That he is supposed to just do what he's told to do, kill or be killed. And that if he exercises his conscience, he brings dishonor to the government, dishonor to the uniform. And I think that's a valuable lesson, Sheldon, for every young person in this country that is being tempted to join the militaries. Keep in mind that you leave your conscience out of the equation here, and you're going to be killing whoever they tell you to kill before you sign that contract. That's something to think about.
Yeah, there's a lot, because we don't know the facts about even Bergdahl's disappearance. There are conflicting reports what happened, so we really have to hold judgment there without saying what he did. And of course, and other people have pointed out, there weren't just the two choices between his walking off his post and continuing fighting. Just to be fair, people have pointed out that he could have gone to his commanding officer to say, I can't do this anymore. Send me to a hospital. I'm just suffering from this, or I want conscientious objection. So they're saying the things he could have done other than walking off, assuming that's what he did. So there's more going on there. But you're right. I mean, you're not allowed to resign from the military like you can from a lot of jobs. I know two Air Force pilots who have been connected with special operations who are applying have currently applied for conscientious objection. I don't know what their chances are of getting it, but that is one option. They're stateside now, but this is a mess. Well, the other thing that annoys me is the way the 5 Taliban people who are being swapped, or were swapped, are being discussed, because the media is extremely, at best, sloppy, if not downright dishonest to the American people. They'll put somebody like John McCain on to say that these guys are the hardest of the hardcore, and he even called them the hardcore jihadis who are responsible for 9/11. Now, if somebody like McCain doesn't know the difference between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, why is he holding such a high post in the U.S. government? U.S. Senator, he's on the Armed Services Committee. This is just ridiculous. In fact, you can easily find well-documented material online showing that each of these 5 was either made a deal with the CIA or the U.S.-friendly government, the Karzai government, or was attempting to, when they were turned in by bounty hunters and sent to Guantanamo. So all these guys were willing to work with the CIA and the U.S. and the Karzai government once the Taliban had been knocked off the perch. That's the way things were going. People shifted sides when the Soviets left, when Soviets came in, when they left. People would change sides depending on money. Just that's the way you survive in an environment like that. And tons of people ended up in Guantanamo who were merely the result of bounties being paid for people. I mean, the government was buying people. That's not a stretch to say that. They were buying people on the flimsiest of evidence, and even people who were willing to come over to the Karzai side, in other words, the CIA, U.S. government side. But the U.S., if it already had cut a deal with a rival warlord, then any enemy of that warlord was now an enemy of the United States. So I got to think it's the most corrupt war the U.S. government has ever fought because of things like this.
I agree with you, and it's a corrupt system at Guantanamo. I mean, this is part of the problems of they mixed their prisoners. They mixed accused terrorists with people in the Afghan government that they had initiated this war against, and it wasn't because they were harboring Al-Qaeda, as many of the proponents of the war have said. Harboring implies that you know that what the people are going to be doing, what the terrorists are going to be doing in advance. That they never brought up any evidence on that. They demanded extradition. And if they had evidence that the Afghan government was complicit or had knowledge of this attack beforehand, they would have never been demanding extradition. They would have immediately just gone to war. They might even have gotten a declaration of war on that basis. They demanded extradition. And when the Afghan government said no, or we'll send bin Laden to another nation for an independent trial, that's when they said, no go, we're going to attack. And so they went to Guantanamo and they mixed all these prisoners together. Taliban government, accused terrorists, people, as you say, that were being bought and paid for, political enemies within the country. It was a huge mess. One final thing before we wrap up on the conscientious objector status. My understanding is that you can only be granted conscientious objection status if you have a good faith opposition to all war in general, that you don't have the luxury of saying, I oppose this particular war because the U.S. didn't get the constitutionally required declaration of war, or because this war is immoral. That if you can't prove that you have a good faith opposition to all war, you're subject to their orders. And you can ask to be transferred out, but they certainly don't have to grant that. They can put you right in the middle of a combat zone, and they can say, we don't really care what your conscience says, kill or be killed. And then you're put in that position of, should I kill a person wrongfully, or should I go ahead and permit myself to be killed here? So that's the thing that people should be thinking about before they sign that contract. Anyway, Sheldon, we're out of time. That's the show this week. Appreciate you all tuning in. This is Jacob Hornberger and Sheldon Richman, this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle, and we'll see you next time.